A single phone call at 2 in the morning shattered the quiet life I had built for 7 years. My son thought winning $800,000 was a miracle. But when he stood in my living room and screamed at me to get out, I realized it was a curse. He believed he held all the power, but as I packed my bags, I knew the truth. I was not just leaving the house. I was leaving him with absolutely nothing. My name is Eleanor Whitford. I am 54 years old, and for the last 7 years, I have lived in a silence so profound that I sometimes forget the sound of my own voice until I speak aloud to an empty room. My home, a sturdy 2-story craftsman in the suburbs of Silver Creek, Colorado, was meant to be filled with noise. It was meant to hold the heavy footsteps of my husband, Martin, and the laughter of our children. But Martin's heart gave out one Tuesday evening while he was shoveling snow, and suddenly, the house became a museum of memories I was too afraid to touch. I adjusted to the quiet. I learned to find comfort in the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway and the hum of the refrigerator. That was until 6 months ago, when my son, Grant, came home. Grant is 29 years old. He was supposed to be the one who made it out. He had gone to the city with big dreams of tech startups and venture capital, but he returned with 2 suitcases, a bruised ego, and a darkness in his eyes that I did not recognize. The sweet boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard had been replaced by a man who paced the floorboards until 3 in the morning, muttering to himself about missed opportunities and people who had wronged him. You just don't understand, Mom. Grant had snapped at me over dinner last week when I gently asked about his job search. He stabbed his fork into the roast chicken, his knuckles white. The market it's impossible right now. I just need one break. One big break. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the erratic mood swings were just stress, that the way he guarded his phone like a secret agent was just a habit of his generation. But the air in the house had shifted. It felt heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up whenever I walked past his closed bedroom door. He had started buying lottery tickets, not just 1 or 2 for fun, but stacks of them. I found receipts crumpled in the trash can in the kitchen, totaling hundreds of dollars. When I confronted him, he laughed, a dry, humorless sound that chilled me. It is an investment. Mum, he said, his eyes gleaming with a frantic sort of hope. I have a system. I have been tracking the numbers for months. I am going to win. I promise you. I am going to win big. I tried to ignore the knot of dread forming in my stomach. I told myself he was just grieving his old life, that he would settle down eventually. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday night, exactly 7 years to the day since Martin died, when the unease turned into something tangible. The house was buried under a fresh layer of snow, insulating us from the outside world. I had gone to bed early, exhausted by the emotional weight of the anniversary. The digital clock on my nightstand read 2 in the morning when my phone buzzed against the wood table. The sound was jarring in the dead silence. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached for the device, my fingers fumbling in the dark. It was a text message from Grant, sent from the room just down the hall. Come here. Now. 3 words. No explanation. No punctuation other than the periods that felt like commands. A normal son would have knocked. A normal son would have called out. This felt cold. Calculated. I threw off the quilt and stepped into my slippers, pulling my robe tight around me against the chill. The hallway was dark, stretching out like a tunnel. As I approached Grant's door, I could hear nothing. No music, no pacing, no muttering. Just a heavy, suffocating silence. I hesitated with my hand on the brass knob. A primal instinct, something deep in my gut, whispered that I should turn around, go back to my room, and lock the door. But I was his mother. I pushed the fear down and turned the handle. The door creaked open. The room was pitch black, save for the eerie, artificial glow of his computer monitors. Grant was sitting in his swivel chair, his back to me. But he spun around the moment the latch clicked. The blue light from the screens washed over his face, casting deep shadows into the hollows of his eyes and making his skin look translucent, almost ghostly. He was not looking at me. He was looking through me, his chest heaving, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly that I thought the leather might tear. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for the wind to push him over. "Grant," I whispered, my voice trembling in the cold air. "What is it?" He did not blink. He just stared, his lips parting slowly as if he had forgotten how to speak. The tension in the room rising until it felt like the air itself was about to shatter. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the hum of the computer fans. Then, Grant exploded. He did not just speak. He erupted from his chair, throwing his arms into the air with a force that knocked a stack of papers to the floor. "I won," he screamed, his voice cracking with a hysteria that made me flinch. "I did it. $800,000. Do you hear me? 800,000 while in hands flew to my mouth. I felt a rush of relief so potent it made my knees weak. I thought of the late notices on his student loans, the tension that had eaten away at our dinners, the darkness I had seen in his eyes. It was over. I stepped forward, tears prickling my eyes, reaching out to hug my son. "Oh, Grant." I breathed. "Thank God. This is a miracle." But when I tried to wrap my arms around him, he stiffened. He did not hug me back. Instead, he pulled away, his eyes darting back to the screen as if checking to make sure the numbers were still there. When he looked at me again, the warmth I expected was missing. In its place was a cold, sharp arrogance. "Yeah, well," he said, smoothing his shirt, his voice dropping to a trite, dismissive tone. "I told you I had a system. You never believed me. You thought I was just wasting my time. I never said that." I protested gently, but he was already waving his hand, dismissing me like a servant. "Whatever. Go back to bed. Mom, I have calls to make." The change happened fast. Within 48 hours, my quiet sanctuary was invaded. Grant did not just celebrate, he conquered. Strange cars began parking on my lawn, leaving deep tire tracks in the grass Martin had tended so carefully. People I had never seen before. Men with hard eyes and women who looked at my furniture with open disdain walked through my front door without knocking. They brought crates of expensive liquor and music that thumped through the floorboards until 4 a.m. I tried to speak to Grant about it on the third day. I found him in the kitchen, nursing a hangover, while 2 of his new friends sat at my dining table, eating cereal out of my good china. "Grant, we need to talk," I said, keeping my voice low. "These people? I don't know them, and the noise is too much." Grant looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "Relax. They are celebrating with me. You need to loosen up." He set his coffee cup down with a clatter. "Actually, I'm glad you're here." I've been talking to a financial advisor, a friend of a friend. He slid a folder across the island counter toward me. We need to transfer the house deed into my name, he said, casually, as if asking for the salt. It is for tax purposes. If the winnings are tied to the property owner, and I own the property, we save about 15% in deductions. It is complicated, but you wouldn't understand the math. I looked at the folder, then at him. Transfer the house, Grant. This is my home. Your father and I bought this place 30 years ago, and it is falling apart. He snapped, his patience evaporating. I am going to have the money to fix it. Just sign the papers. Mum, stop being so difficult. I pushed the folder back. I need time to think about it. He didn't like that. Over the next week, the atmosphere turned toxic. I started noticing odd things on my own bank notifications, small withdrawals for processing fees and consultation charges that I had never authorized. When I called the bank, they said the approval came from a device recognized as my son's iPad. Then came the whispering. Late one night, while I was downstairs getting water, I heard Grant on the back porch. The sliding glass door was cracked open just an inch. She doesn't suspect a thing, Grant was saying, his voice hushed and urgent. Yeah, the house is the key. Once she signs... No, I know. We have to do it fast. The deadline is next week. My heart hammered against my ribs. I retreated to my room, locking the door for the first time in 20 years. The breaking point arrived on Sunday morning. I walked into the living room to find Grant and 3 of his friends dismantling the bookshelves Martin had built by hand. Books were piled haphazardly on the floor, some with their covers torn. "What are you doing?" I cried out, rushing forward to grab a photo album they had tossed onto the coffee table. "Stop it. This is my house." Grant turned slowly. He was holding a crowbar. The look on his face was not one of a son looking at his mother. It was the look of a landlord looking at a squatter. "That's the thing. Eleanor," he said. He didn't call me Mom. He called me Eleanor. "I'm done asking. What are you talking about?" I clutched the album to my chest, my hands trembling. "Grant, please. You are scaring me." He stepped closer, towering over me. The friends behind him stopped working and watched, smirking. "I need this space," he said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "And you are in the way. You have been in the way for years. I have money now. I have a future. And it doesn't include you nagging me about coasters and curfew. You want me to leave?" I stammered, tears spilling over. "But where would I go?" Grant walked to the front door and pulled it open, letting the cold winter air rush in. He pointed to the driveway. "I don't care," he said. "Get out." "Mum." I stood frozen on the porch, the biting wind cutting through my thin sweater. But the cold was nothing compared to the hollow ache spreading in my chest. Grant slammed the door in my face. The sound echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the life I had known. I stared at the wood. The same wood I had sanded and varnished with Martin 20 years ago, and I could not make my legs move. My mind replayed the scene in reverse, but then it jumped further back, unearthing memories I thought were safe. I saw Grant at 5 years old, running into my arms with a scraped knee, crying because the world was too big and too sharp. I saw him at 10, presenting me with a handmade Mother's Day card that promised he would buy me a castle when he grew up. Those images shattered like glass against the reality of the man who had just looked at me with eyes devoid of love. I pounded on the door. Grant, open this door. We need to talk about this." The door opened abruptly. Grant stood there, his face twisted into a mask of irritation that I did not recognize. Go away. Eleanor. He spat, the name feeling like a slap. I told you. I am done. But why, I pleaded, my voice breaking. I am your mother. I have done everything for you. Why are you doing this? He leaned in close, and I smelled the stale alcohol on his breath, mingled with a strange, metallic scent of fear. Because you are always watching, he hissed. You are always judging. I have money now. I don't need your pity, and I definitely don't need you hovering over me. He slammed the door again. I retreated to the sidewalk, shivering. Mrs. Gable, my neighbour of 15 years, was pretending to water her dead hydrangeas, but her eyes were fixed on me. She shuffled over to the fence, her voice a low whisper. Eleanor, she said, glancing nervously at my front windows. You need to be careful. Those men, the ones coming in and out at night, they aren't just friends. I know they are loud. Martha, I said, wiping my eyes. I'm sorry about the noise. It isn't the noise. She interrupted, gripping the fence rail. I saw one of them drop something yesterday. A gun. Eleanor. I saw a gun tucked into his waistband. And your son. He looked terrified of them. A chill that had nothing to do with the winter air ran down my spine. I decided I could not leave just yet. I parked my car down the street, hidden behind a large oak tree, and waited. For 3 days, I lived out of my sedan, watching my own house. I saw Grant leave late at night. I followed him, keeping a safe distance. He did not go to a bank or a realtor. He drove to the old industrial district on the east side of town, pulling into the lot of a dilapidated warehouse known among locals as a front for illegal gambling. On the 4th morning, I saw Grant leave in a rush, forgetting to lock the back gate. I seized the chance. I needed my medication, and I needed answers. I slipped through the backyard, my heart pounding in my throat. The back door was unlocked. The kitchen was a wreck. Empty takeout boxes and beer bottles covered every surface. On the counter, Grant's iPad was plugged in, the screen glowing with a notification. I knew the passcode. It was his birthday. My fingers trembled as I typed the 4 digits. The messages were not from a financial advisor. They were from a contact named simply The Shark. TikTok. Grant. The interest is compounding. 1 week. That is all you have. Do not make us come back for the mother. Just get the asset. I gasped, my hand flying to my mouth. Get the asset. They meant the house. The tax purpose story was a lie. He wasn't trying to save money. He was trying to liquidate the only thing of value we had left to pay off a debt that must have been astronomical. Suddenly, I heard a car door slam in the driveway. Grant was back. I panicked. I grabbed a few essential documents from the desk drawer, my passport, the original deed to the house, and my checkbook, and ran out the back door just as the front key turned in the lock. I made it to my car, my lungs burning. I drove to a motel on the edge of town, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. But when I calmed down, I realized I had left my jewelry box, the one with Martin's wedding ring, in the master bedroom. I had to go back one last time. I waited until dusk. I walked up to the front door, slipping my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned and tried again, jiggling it. It stopped halfway. I pulled it out and looked at the keyhole. The metal was shiny, new. He had changed the locks. He hadn't just kicked me out in a fit of rage. He had planned this. He had called a locksmith while I was gone. I stood there, completely locked out of the home I had paid for, the home I had built. But as the weight of the betrayal crushed me, a sharper, colder realization pierced through the grief. The text message about the asset and the interest replayed in my mind. Grant didn't just win the lottery and turn into a monster. He was in trouble. Deep, dangerous trouble. And he had traded his mother's safety to save his own skin. You foolish boy. I whispered to the closed door, stepping back into the darkness. You think locking me out will save you, but you just locked yourself in with them. The room I rented at the Starlight Motel smelled of stale cigarette smoke and lemon pledge. It was on the outskirts of town, a place where people went when they wanted to disappear or when they had nowhere else to go. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, staring at the peeling beige wallpaper. My entire life had been contained within the four walls of my home on Elm Street, and now my world had shrunk to a room that cost $45 a night. I could not just sit there and rot. My mind kept circling back to the messages on Grant's iPad and the phrase, "Get the asset." I needed to know how deep this went. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for the Lewis Housing Security Agency. I had worked there as a senior accountant for 20 years before retiring. They handled high-risk property insurance and title fraud protection. If anyone could see if my financial identity was being tampered with, it was them. Lewis Housing. This is Sarah. A familiar voice chirped. Sarah. It is Eleanor, I said, keeping my voice steady. Eleanor Whitford. Eleanor. Oh my goodness. How are you? We were just talking about your famous apple pie in the break room yesterday. I am fine. Sarah. I lied, gripping the phone tight. Listen, I need a favor. Can you access the internal logs for my personal file? I have a bad feeling about some paperwork I might have misplaced. There was a pause, the sound of typing on the other end. Well, you know I am not technically supposed to, but for you... Hold on a second. The silence that followed stretched for what felt like 10 minutes. When Sarah came back on the line, her tone had lost all its warmth. It was professional, cold, and laced with concern. Eleanor, she said slowly, have you been authorizing credit checks recently? Or title transfer requests? No. I whispered. None. There have been 5 inquiries in the last 48 hours, Sarah said. And Eleanor, someone tried to access your retirement portfolio using your social security number this morning. The system flagged it because the IP address was not yours. It was from a device registered to a... Grant Whitford. My stomach dropped. Thank you. Sarah, please, lock everything down. Freeze it all. I will do it right now. Eleanor, is everything okay? I have to go, I said, and hung up. I immediately opened my banking app. My hands were shaking so badly I mistyped my password twice. When I finally got in, the numbers on the screen made me gasp. My savings account, which I had built up over 30 years of hard work, was missing $7,000. There were transfers of $200, $500, $1,000, all sent to an account labeled simply Consulting Services. He was draining me. He wasn't just trying to take the house to pay a debt. He was liquidating his own mother to save himself. I sat there, paralyzed by the betrayal. Grant had not just lost his way. He was actively destroying me to cover his tracks. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my hand. It was not a notification from the bank. It was a text message from a number I did not recognize. You should leave town if you want to be safe. I stared at the words, the glowing white letters burning into my retinas. It was not from Grant. Grant would have threatened me or begged me. This was cold, clinical. It was a warning from someone who knew exactly where I was and what was happening. I stood up and walked to the window, peering through the dirty blinds. The parking lot was empty except for a rusted truck and my sedan, but the feeling of being watched crawled over my skin like insects. Grant was involved with people who did not send polite warnings. If they knew my number, they knew everything. I realized then that I could not handle this alone. I was an accountant, a widow, a mother. I was not a soldier. I needed someone who knew how to navigate the shadows that my son had dragged us into. I opened the browser on my phone and typed in a search query I never thought I would need private investigators near Silver Creek. One name stood out, accompanied by a picture of a stern-looking woman with graying hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. Ruth Delgado, specializing in fraud and surveillance. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Delgado. A raspy voice answered. I need help, I said, my voice finally finding its strength. My son won the lottery. Or he says he did. And now I think he is going to kill me. Ruth Delgado was not what I expected. At 58 years old, she looked more like a strict librarian than a private investigator. She met me at a diner near the highway, wearing a sensible beige coat and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. But when she spoke, her voice was like gravel, and her eyes missed nothing. I will take the case. Mrs. Whitford, Ruth said, sliding a contract across the sticky table. But I have to warn you. If your son is mixed up in what I think he is, you might not like what I find. I just need the truth, I said, signing the paper. Ruth began her surveillance immediately, for the next 3 days. I waited in my motel room, pacing the floor and jumping every time a car door slammed outside. When Ruth finally returned, she did not look happy. She carried a thick manila envelope that she placed heavily on the small round table by the window. Sit down. Eleanor, she said. I sat. Ruth opened the folder and spread several photographs out on the bedspread. They showed Grant entering a nondescript office building in the industrial district, then exiting an hour later, looking pale and sweating. Grant is not investing in stocks, Ruth said bluntly. He is mixed up in an underground financial smuggling ring. They move dirty money through legitimate assets to clean it. And right now, the asset they are using is you. I stared at her, confused. Me. But I have nothing left. He kicked me out. Ruth sighed and pulled a stack of documents from the envelope. He kicked you out physically, but on paper. You are very much involved. Look at this. She handed me a credit report. I scanned the lines, my breath catching in my throat. There were 3 pending loan applications, all for massive amounts, secured against my life insurance policy and my remaining retirement fund. The applicant listed was Eleanor Whitford, but the contact email was Grant's private address. He used my name, I whispered, my hand trembling as I held the paper. He forged my signature. It is worse than just forgery, Ruth explained, leaning forward, her face grim. He is using your identity as the guarantor. That means he gets the cash up front. But the debt is legally yours. If he defaults, which he will. Because these are high-risk loans, the creditors do not go after him. They go after you. If he goes bankrupt, every single cent of that debt falls on your shoulders. I felt sick. The betrayal was so absolute it was hard to comprehend. He is destroying me. Just to save himself, he is desperate, Ruth said. She pointed to another photo, this one showing the men who had been partying at my house. I ran background checks on his new friends. They aren't friends. Eleanor. That one on the left served 5 years for aggravated assault. The one with the neck tattoo is known for extortion. These are handlers. They are there to make sure Grant does what he is told. Then she slid the final photograph toward me. It was grainy, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens in the dark. It showed the back parking lot of a supermarket. Grant was standing next to his car, talking to a man I had never seen before. The stranger was tall, wearing a long, dark coat, his face obscured by shadows, but his posture radiated a terrifying authority. Grant looked small next to him, his shoulders hunched. "Who is that?" I asked, a cold shiver running down my spine. "We don't know his name yet," Ruth said, "but we know he is the one pulling the strings. Look at the way Grant is standing. He is terrified." I looked closer. Grant was handing the man a thick envelope, but the man didn't look pleased. He was leaning in close to Grant's face. "That was last night," Ruth said. "Grant is paying them, but it is not enough. They are bleeding your accounts dry. They are transferring the house. They are taking out insurance policies in your name." Why, I asked, tears stinging my eyes. Why go through all this trouble? Why not just take the money and leave? Ruth took off her glasses and looked me dead in the eye. The silence in the motel room felt heavy, suffocating, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. "I have seen this pattern before," Ruth said softly. "As long as you are alive, Eleanor, you can contest the signatures. You can go to the police. You can freeze the accounts. You are the only loose end in their scheme." She tapped the photo of the dark figure, her voice dropping to a whisper that froze my blood. "They don't just want your money, Mrs. Whitford. They want you gone." I sat in the dim light of the motel room and watched the dust motes dance in the beam of sun cutting through the blinds. A terrifying clarity had settled over me. Grant was no longer the arrogant winner of a lottery. He was a drowning man, flailing in the middle of an ocean, dragging everyone near him down into the depths. He had lost control of the money, the house, and now he had lost control of the monsters he had invited into our lives. The fear became physical later that afternoon. I had driven to the pharmacy on the other side of town to refill my blood pressure medication. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed a black sedan with heavily tinted windows idling near the exit. I turned right. It turned right. I turned left onto a residential street. It followed. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took 3 quick, nonsensical turns, weaving through the neighborhood until I finally sped through a yellow light just as it turned red. I looked in the rearview mirror. The black car had stopped at the intersection, ominous and silent. I did not go back to the motel immediately. I drove around for 2 hours, checking my mirrors every 10 seconds, until I was sure I was alone. When I finally returned to the room, Ruth was waiting for me. She did not look up when I entered. She was hunched over her laptop, the screen illuminating her grim expression. "You were followed," Ruth stated, not asking. "A black sedan," I said, locking the door and sliding the chain into place with trembling fingers. They stayed right behind me for miles." Ruth nodded slowly. "They are keeping tabs on you. They need to know exactly where the loose end is before they cut it. Cut it, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. You mean kill me? Ruth turned the laptop around so I could see the screen. I managed to mirror Grant's cloud storage. He left his backup synchronization on. Eleanor, you need to look at this, but you need to brace yourself. I stepped forward. On the screen was a PDF document. It was a standard government form, official and cold. I squinted at the text, and the room seemed to spin. It was a death certificate. Name of deceased Eleanor Marie Whitford. The date of death was left blank. No. I gasped, backing away until my legs hit the edge of the bed, and I sat down heavily. No, this isn't real. He has my death certificate. He has a template. Ruth corrected me, her voice hard but not unkind. Ready to be filed. And that is not all. She clicked to the next tab. It was a document from my life insurance provider. 2 days ago. A request was processed to update your policy, Ruth explained, pointing to the highlighted figures. The coverage was increased to $2 million, and the beneficiary was confirmed as Grant Whitford. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my name. It looked like my handwriting, the loop of the E and the sharp cross of the T. But I had never seen this document in my life. I didn't sign that, I said, shaking my head violently. I never authorized an increase. We could barely afford the premiums on the old policy, I know, Ruth said. I had a handwriting expert look at it an hour ago. It is a forgery. A good one? Likely done by the same people handling his investments. But it proves intent. Eleanor, Grant isn't just drowning in debt. He is being offered a way out. By killing me, I choked out, the bile rising in my throat. My own son. He owes them more money than he has. Ruth said. The house isn't enough anymore. The $800,000 is gone. You are worth more to them dead than alive. If you die, the insurance pays out $2 million. That clears his debt and leaves him with a profit. That is the deal they offered him. I covered my face with my hands, rocking back and forth. The image of Grant's face when he screamed, "Get out," flashed in my mind. He hadn't just been angry. He had been terrified. He had been pushing me away. Yes, but now I realized he was also setting the stage. He looked at me. I sobbed into my palms. He looked at me and told me to leave. I thought he just wanted the house. I thought he was just greedy. He is trapped, Ruth said, closing the laptop with a snap. And a trapped animal will chew off its own leg to escape. Or in this case, his mother. I lowered my hands. The tears were still streaming down my face. But the shock was beginning to harden into something else, something cold and final. He isn't just waiting for me to die, I whispered, staring at the blank space on the death certificate in my mind. He is planning to make it happen. Ruth nodded. They are. And Grant is letting them. I walked to the window and peered through the slit in the curtains. The sun had set, and the parking lot was bathed in the sickly yellow glow of the streetlights. Somewhere out there, in the dark. My son was waiting for a phone call that would tell him his mother was gone, so he could fill in the date and cash the check. He erased me, I said, my voice hollow. He didn't just break my heart. He erased my life. The air in the motel room felt thin, as if the walls were slowly closing in to crush the life out of me. Ruth sat at the small round table, her posture rigid. She had been digging through the encrypted files on Grant's mirrored drive for 6 hours straight. And when she finally turned to look at me, her face was devoid of pity. It was the face of a woman who had seen the bottom of the human soul and found nothing but rot. We need to stop calling it a lottery win. Eleanor, Ruth said, her voice low and even. There was no luck involved. It was a transaction. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the edge of the bedspread. He showed me the ticket. He showed me the check. Smoke and mirrors. Ruth replied. She slid a spreadsheet across the table toward me. I found his ledger, the real one. Grant did not start gambling when he won. He has been gambling for 2 years. Before he ever bought that ticket, he was already in the hole for over $300,000. My breath hitched. $300,000. It was an impossible sum. More money than Martin and I had saved in a lifetime of work. He was drowning. Ruth continued, her finger tracing the column of red numbers. And the people he owed, they own the lottery syndicate. It is a laundering scheme. They rigged a win for him. They handed him $800,000 of dirty money, disguised as a clean prize. He keeps enough to look successful. But the rest, he has to pay it back to them to clear the debt. It is how they wash their cash. I shook my head, trying to process the twisted logic. So he is just a mule, a puppet. He is a slave. Ruth corrected me. But here is the problem. The debt was not just money. Interest in their world is not calculated in percentages. It is calculated in favors and assets. Part of the deal was the house. They need a clean property to flip, something to bury more cash in. Grant promised them the deed. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. But the house is in my name. Exactly, Ruth said. That is why the transaction is failing. You are the glitch in the system. As long as you are breathing and holding that title, Grant cannot pay his masters. And these men, they do not like waiting. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small digital recorder. I intercepted a voice memo sent to his cloud an hour ago. She said, I debated showing this to you, but you need to hear it. You need to know that the son you are mourning died a long time ago. She pressed the button. The audio was grainy, filled with the background noise of what sounded like a busy bar. Then, a deep voice spoke. The transfer is stalled. Grant, we are losing patience. Then came Grant's voice. It was high-pitched, trembling, pathetic. I know. She is being stubborn. I tried to make her sign, but she just wouldn't do it. Stubborn is not an excuse. The deep voice growled. The house needs to be empty. The owner needs to be gone. Do we need to send a crew to finish the job? There was a pause on the tape, a silence that stretched for an eternity. I prayed to hear Grant defend me. I prayed to hear him say, No, don't touch her. She is my mother. Instead, I heard a sniffle, followed by a voice that sounded like it was choking on fear. No, please, don't send anyone. I can do it. I will handle her, I promise. Just give me 2 more days. I will make sure she is gone. Ruth clicked the device off. The silence that rushed back into the room was deafening. I did not scream. I did not cry. I felt something inside my chest fracture, a clean, sharp break that severed the last tether connecting me to the boy I had raised. The image of Grant running to me with a scraped knee vanished. The memory of him blowing out candles on his 10th birthday dissolved. All that remained was the sound of his voice promising to handle me like a piece of garbage that needed to be taken out. I slid off the bed and onto the floor, my knees hitting the carpet with a thud. I curled into myself, gasping for air, feeling the physical agony of a heart turning to stone. He said. I choked out, my hands clawing at my chest. He said he would handle me. He did. Ruth said. She did not move to comfort me. She knew I needed to break before I could be rebuilt. He sold you out. Eleanor. He traded your life for another week of breathing room. I lay there for a long time, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. I let the grief wash over me, hot and suffocating. I let it burn everything it touched. But when the fire died down, what was left in the ashes was not despair. It was something hard, something cold, something dangerous. I slowly pushed myself up. I wiped the tears from my face with the back of my hand. When I looked at Ruth, I was no longer the frightened widow hiding in a motel. He thinks I am weak, I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. He thinks I am just a confused old woman who will fade away. Ruth raised an eyebrow, a flicker of approval in her eyes. What do you want to do? Eleanor, I walked to the table and looked at the recorder, then at the forged documents. He wants to handle me, I whispered, a dark resolve settling over my features. Then let him try. But he is going to find out that I am not the one who is going to disappear. The time for weeping was over. I looked at the face in the motel bathroom mirror, and I did not recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Yes. But the fear that had clouded them for weeks was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I washed my face with freezing water, scrubbing away the last traces of the victim I had been. Grant had declared war on me. He thought he was fighting a fragile, lonely widow. He was about to find out he was fighting a mother who had nothing left to lose. I walked back into the main room where Ruth was organizing our arsenal. It was not a collection of guns or knives, but something far more lethal paper. We had the forged insurance documents, the bank statements showing the laundering, the text messages about the asset, and the damning death certificate template. We have enough to go to the police right now, I said, my voice steady. Ruth looked up, shaking her head. We have enough for fraud, maybe identity theft. But if you want to nail him for the conspiracy to murder, if you want to take down the men pulling his strings, we need him to say it. We need a confession that ties the debt to the life insurance. Then let's get it, I said. Ruth outlined the plan. It was simple, dangerous, and relied entirely on Grant's arrogance. I sat on the edge of the bed and picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over his contact name. I took a deep breath, visualizing the terrified woman I used to be, and dialed. He answered on the second ring. Mom. His voice was sharp, suspicious. Grant. I let my voice crack, pitching it low and trembling. I can't do this anymore. The motel. It is so cold. I have no money left. There was a pause, and then the tone of his voice shifted. It became sickeningly sweet. A predator sensing a wounded animal? Oh, Mom, I have been so worried about you. Where are you? I am just driving around. I lied. I want to come home. Grant, I am ready to sign whatever you want. I just want my house back. I just want to be safe. Of course, he said, the eagerness leaking through the phone like poison. Of course. Mom, come home. Come home right now. We can fix everything. I will have the papers ready, and we can just put this all behind us. He did not ask if I was okay. He did not apologize. He just heard sign and saw his salvation. Okay, I whispered. I will be there in 20 minutes. I hung up. Ruth was already moving. She pulled a small black device from her bag and taped it to the underside of my blouse, right over my heart. The microphone is sensitive, she instructed, her hands efficient and professional. It will pick up everything in the room. I will be in the van down the street with 2 officers from the state police. We will be listening live. If he touches you, if I sense any immediate danger, we are coming in. But try to keep him talking. Get him to admit why he needs the signature today. I buttoned my cardigan over the wire. It felt heavy, like armor. I am ready, I said. We drove in separate cars. I parked my sedan 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance to the house. The neighborhood was quiet, the lawns perfectly manicured, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I clutched my purse tight against my side. Inside, hidden between old receipts, were the copies of the evidence, the proof of his betrayal. I reached the driveway. The house looked exactly as it always had. The white siding, the porch swing, the oak tree Martin had planted. But it felt like a stage set now, a facade hiding a rot that had eaten it from the inside out. I walked up the steps. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. I reached for the doorknob, and then I remembered. The locks were changed. I raised my hand and knocked. The door swung open almost instantly. Grant stood there. He looked terrible. He had lost weight. His eyes were sunken and dark, and he vibrated with a nervous energy that bordered on mania. But when he saw me, he forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mom," he said, stepping back to let me in. "I am so glad you are back." I stepped across the threshold, the air inside smelling of stale pizza and expensive cologne. I walked into the living room, the space where I had raised him, and turned to face the stranger wearing my son's face. "I am home, Grant," I said, my voice calm, the wire on my chest recording every breath. "Now tell me, why did you really need me to come back?" Grant guided me to the sofa with a gentleness that made my skin crawl. He had prepared a cup of tea, placing it on a coaster next to a stack of crisp, white documents. The living room was suffocatingly warm, the heat cranked up too high, or perhaps it was just the radiating intensity of his desperation. He sat on the edge of the coffee table, his knees almost touching mine, leaning in with a frantic, wide-eyed smile that looked painted on. "I am so glad you came to your senses." "Mom," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "We can fix this. We can start over. Just sign these transfer papers, and I will take care of everything else." I looked at the papers. They were not just transfer deeds. Buried in the stack was a power of attorney form. I looked up at him, keeping my hand near the top button of my cardigan where the microphone was taped. "Grant," I said softly, "you seem in such a rush. Why do we have to do this today? Can't we wait until Monday?" He flinched as if I had struck him. He stood up and began pacing the rug, running his hands through his hair. No, we can't wait. Monday is too late. The deadline is. It is tonight." "What deadline?" I pressed, leaning forward. "Is this about the lottery money?" "The $800,000, Grant let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes wild. "There was no lottery. Mum, don't you get it? There was never any prize. It was a loan, a setup. I owe them over $300,000, and the interest is eating me alive. So you are giving them my house? I asked, making sure my voice was clear for the recording. You are selling my home to pay a gambling debt. I already sold it, he shouted, the facade of sweetness shattering completely. It is done. They own it, but they can't take possession while you are still living here, while you are still on the title. I stood up slowly. So, what was the plan? Grant. If I didn't sign, what were you going to do? What about the insurance policy you changed? He froze. The colour drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of grey. He looked at the door, then back at me, tears welling in his eyes. He looked like a frightened child, but I knew better. I didn't want to, he stammered, his voice dropping to a whisper. But they said if I didn't fix the problem, they would fix me. They told me accidents happen all the time. Falls down the stairs, carbon monoxide. They said if I let it happen, the insurance would cover the rest of the debt. You agreed to let them kill me? I asked, the horror of it hitting me harder than I expected. Despite knowing the truth, you were going to let them murder your own mother for money. I had no choice. He sobbed, reaching out as if to grab my hand. Mom, please, you have to understand. I am terrified. Just sign the papers, and maybe they will let you go. Maybe they will just take the house and leave us alone. Before I could answer, the front door opened. We had not heard a car approach. We had not heard footsteps. But suddenly, the hallway was filled with the heavy presence of a man. I turned to see the figure from Ruth's photograph, the man from the parking lot. He was massive, wearing a long, dark coat, and his eyes were cold, dead things. Grant screamed, stumbling back against the television stand. No, you said I had until midnight. She is here. She is signing it right now. The man ignored Grant. He looked at me, his gaze travelling over my face with a terrifying indifference. He reached into his coat pocket. The deal has changed. Grant, the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. Too much noise? Too much time wasted? No. Wait, Grant shrieked, throwing himself between me and the man. Don't touch her. I will do it. I will get the signature. It is too late for signatures, the man said, taking a step forward. Now I yelled at the top of my lungs. The sound of shattering glass erupted from the back of the house. At the same moment, the front door was kicked wide open, splintering the frame. Police, get on the ground, now. Uniformed officers swarmed the room, their weapons drawn. The dark man moved to run, but two officers tackled him into the hallway wall with a bone-jarring thud. Grant stood paralyzed in the center of the chaos, his hands raised, tears streaming down his face. Ruth walked in behind the officers, looking calm and satisfied. She locked eyes with me and gave a curt nod. An officer grabbed Grant, spinning him around and slamming him against the wall. I heard the metallic click of handcuffs, a sound that seemed to signal the final death of my old life. Mom Grant wailed as they dragged him toward the door. He twisted his head back, his face a mask of agony and regret. Mom, tell them I was trying to save you. Mom, please. I stood still, my hands clutching my purse. I watched the boy I had carried, the boy I had raised, the man who had traded my life for a ledger entry. I did not look away, but I did not step forward. You didn't try to save me, Grant, I said, my voice barely audible over the commotion. But I knew he heard me. You only tried to save yourself. The door closed behind him, leaving me standing in the wreckage of my home, surrounded by strangers. with the echo of his desperate plea fading into the cold night air. The aftermath was not a whirlwind. It was a slow, methodical excavation of the truth. The police forensic team spent 3 days combing through the house, and what they found was a paper trail of damnation. They found the original loan agreements hidden in the lining of Grant's suitcase. They found the forged insurance policy on his laptop, time-stamped and edited by a user named simply Administrator. And they found the recordings. Grant did not protect his handlers. Once the handcuffs were on, the arrogance that had fueled him for months evaporated, leaving behind a terrified boy desperate to cut a deal. He testified against everyone. Based on his information, the state police launched a massive raid 2 weeks later. They arrested the man in the dark coat, a mid-level enforcer for a syndicate operating out of Chicago, and dismantled the entire local cell. I was granted full protection during the proceedings. The court voided every single document Grant had signed. The transfer of the deed was nullified. The loans taken out in my name were erased. Legally, I was made whole. Emotionally, I was bankrupt. I sat in the back row of the courtroom on the day of the sentencing. Grant stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit that made him look sickly and pale. He refused to look at the gallery. He refused to look at me. "Mr. Whitford," the judge said, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "You conspired to defraud the one person who should have been able to trust you implicitly. You forged documents. You engaged in a conspiracy that would have resulted in the loss of a human life. This court shows no leniency for matricidal intent." Grant received 25 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole for the first 20. When the gavel came down, he didn't scream or cry. He just slumped forward, his forehead touching the defense table. It was the posture of a man who finally understood the weight of zero. I never went back to the house to live. I couldn't. The walls whispered with the ghost of his betrayal. Every time I looked at the kitchen table, I saw him pushing the papers toward me. Every time I looked at the front door, I heard him screaming for me to get out. I sold the property to the Lewis Housing Security Agency. They planned to use it as a safe house for witnesses in protective custody. It felt fitting that the place where my safety was almost stolen would now be used to protect others. I signed the sale papers with a steady hand, took the check, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. Now, I live in a small, weathered cottage on the coast of Maine. The air here smells of salt and pine, and the noise of the ocean is constant, drowning out the silence that used to terrify me. I have a garden again. I have neighbors who wave to me, though they know nothing of my past. It is a peaceful life. It is a safe life. But it is not a happy life. I spend my evenings sitting on the porch, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, watching the grey waves crash against the rocks. The question never truly leaves me. It cycles through my mind with the rhythm of the tides. How did it happen? How did the baby I nursed, the toddler I taught to walk, the boy who cried when his goldfish died, turn into a man who could look at his mother and see nothing but a dollar sign, "I will never have an answer"? But as the sun dips below the horizon, casting long shadows across the water, I find a grim sort of satisfaction. Grant wanted to take everything from me. He wanted to leave me homeless, penniless, and dead. Instead, he sits in a concrete cell with nothing but time, while I sit here, breathing the free air, listening to the ocean. I sipped my tea, the steam warming my face against the chill. I did not kill him. I did not stoop to his level. I simply let him fall into the hole he dug for me. From the day Grant yelled, "Get out!" I understood sometimes the only revenge is taking back the life they wanted to steal. Thank you so much for tuning in to this story. I would love to know where you guys are listening from. Are you winding down at home, driving to work, or maybe taking a break at the office? Drop a comment below and let me know. I love reading through them and seeing where our community is hanging out. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Grandma's Family Diary. Smash that like button. And if you really want to support us, hit that hype button so we can share these stories with even more people. See you in the next video.